So I think it's worth kind of going over those figures very briefly again. So the Housing for All plan, 41,000 units this year, 43 next year. That's well below what's actually needed. The ESRI, Central Bank and others have say 54,000 odd is needed, even more there according to Mark Cassidy possibly. 34,000 this year, 20,000 short of target. That's a failure of the plan, isn't it?
So I suppose there's a number of things here. So one was the RSI being in at the Oireachtas committee today. Obviously, we're early in the year in terms of projections, and it's very difficult to, I suppose, determine where we will be in terms of the outturn. But the figures are challenging.
They said this is a best case scenario.
So the figures,
those figures are best case scenario.
So the figures are challenging, absolutely. I'm not shying away from that, absolutely. But that's why we've brought forward a measure today in terms of ensuring that we keep permissions that have been through an extensive planning process active. So we're extending planning permissions that are due to expire in the last 2 years by a further 3 years. And we're also introducing a parallel measure in relation to judicial reviews. So developments that have been through the judicial review process that might have been in it for several years and are now coming to the end of their planning permission, we're going to retrospectively apply a stop the clock measure so they get back their time that they've been lost in the JR process. And I think that's a common sense and practical measure. So we can talk about supply, which I'm sure we are going to do, but unless we have those planning permissions in the system, we're not going to be able to activate
them. So how much will that change to planning laws, increase supply?
So we know that there have been about over 15,000 housing units that have been through the judicial review process in the last 5 years that have lost a significant amount of time. We know that there's a further 3,200 that are currently in the judicial review process that will potentially, if they're successful, benefit from these
15,000 over
measures.
5 years is 3,000 a year, and there's no guarantee that those planning permissions actually expired. As you said, they just lost a significant amount of time. So even to be generous and suggest half of them lost their planning permission, that's about 1,500 units a year. What did I say we were short? 20,000?
No.
So 18,500 short, if that works out?
So what you have to appreciate in terms of the judicial review ones is that there'll be different periods of time that will be lost. So the issue is, if you only have 6 months left on the end of your planning permission, you're not going to be able to activate on site because you're not going to be able to get the practical completion to be able to extend that planning permission for a further 2 years. So effectively, you have a null and void planning permission. So even though it's there on paper with 15,000 that are there, that could be built, but they can't be because
let's run with that argument and give you the absolute benefit of the doubt and say it's all of them. It's still 3,000 units per year. So what that works out as, according to your maths. Yeah, 20,000 we're short. So 17,000 we're still short. Listen, we could just bore people with, and I don't want to kind of knock, I'm not suggesting for a moment that this will have no material impact. But at the same time, even with these measures, we are going to miss targets by a massive, massive degree. And each house is about 2.2 people? Is that the average occupancy of a house? So what's 20,000? Over 40,000 people watching this tonight, possibly, who expect to be moving into a home this year, won't.
So we have to use every possible lever. So I'm not going to dismiss the benefit of keeping planning permissions alive, because I think we can talk about viability measures, but unless we have those planning permissions and keep them active, well, then we're not living in the real world here. We have to use every lever at our disposal. We have a €6.8 billion budget for housing. We've already this year added a further 450 million for social and affordable housing. We've added 30 million to the First Home Scheme. That First Home Scheme is helping people to bridge the gap on finance to purchase their first home. And we know that there are 500 first-time buyers every single week purchasing. Is it enough? Of course it's not enough.
It's a bad scheme, according to some of those before the Oireachtas committee today. And it's a demand-side scheme. It's increasing demand without increasing supply.
Well, I know many people that have availed of that first home scheme and that are in their home here tonight, potentially watching the programme here tonight. And certainly they were appreciative of the scheme because it bridged the gap to enable them to be able to get on the housing market. Similarly with the Help to Buy that has supported over 54,000 first-time buyers to be able to get on.
And you're satisfied then? You're happy to ignore the advice of property economists and people who work in the ESRI and the central bank who say that demand-side interventions are lunacy?
No, so what the Help to Buy does is it supports first-time buyers to get their deposit together. It gives them their tax back that they've worked hard for.
We know how it works. It makes it easier for people to buy a home, which is great. But it's a demand-side intervention when we've got a supply-side problem.
But that's why we are trying to ensure that we have a series of measures. I'm not saying for one second that the measure that has been introduced today is a panacea. We need to obviously increase housing output. That's why I said about 450 million further that has gone into social and affordable delivery. We also need to utilise the existing schemes like Croí Cities, which are providing apartments for sale. There was only 70 units went on sale in Cork last week. Huge demand for those. And the cost rental scheme that the Land Development Agency, the approved housing bodies and local authorities are delivering further now at scale. Yeah. So it's a combination of measures. It's not one silver bullet that's going to make any difference.
Without relitigating the last 10 years, what would Labour do today?
Well, I think the first thing we have to say and what the government are doing is realise that there's actually an emergency here, Kieran, and that we actually need more provision of housing. And I don't think they've realised that the figures have. Like before the election, we heard about 40,000 figures that turned into 31,000 figures. We're now hearing that they're only going to hit 30 to 35,000 over the next 2 years. What Labour would do is that we would look at the vacancy. And the recent on Post have said that there's 80,000 vacant houses in this country. So that's something that we need to tackle. But we need to class it as an emergency. And that would actually bring with a bit of investment, a bit of outside-the-box thinking by government.
How much investment? How much to turn around some of those houses?
Well, some of those houses, the Croí grant, obviously, that the government actually provide is a good grant. There's some deficiencies with it, which I can go into. But, we're talking about somewhere in the region of 50 to 100,000. And some of them are actually turnkey as well, that have lain vacant since they were actually, built. So they may not cost as much. But this is the outside-the-box thinking that the government are not doing at the moment that we need to do. If there are 80,000 vacancies and that comes from the Post figure, then that's something that we need to tackle straight away.
But, I mean, we already, as a country, spend per capita more than almost any other European state when it comes to housing. I mean, is the solution really to spend more public money? Well, I appreciate those vacant units could be turned around, but I'm listening to people for the last 15 years suggesting vacant units are going to get us out of the housing crisis. If it was as simple as that, we'd have done it before now.
But we
need 20 billion euro of private investment to get us out of this.
Obviously, there has a combination of both. There's absolutely no doubt about it. But we haven't tackled the vacancy rate. That's a reality. And until government do that, we are still going to be left with 80,000 vacant houses. So that's just one part of it. And, we need to look at everything. And the Minister is right. We just can't concentrate on one part of it. But to me, the government need to open up their eyes and see what's going on and look at the figures.
John, is there a dawning realisation among some in government, or a dawning acceptance, maybe, it's a better way of putting it, that actually they can solve this? When you look at the problems, when you look at the labour shortages, the issues around zoning of land, the issues around planning permission, the issues around material costs, the issues around a lack of finance, that they actually can solve it. This is going to take a generation to solve, not one housing.
I don't think the community is there to accept that. I mean, if you were accepting it, I think where you'd start is revise the housing figures. If the public know they're being spoken to honestly, it's clear to everybody with the deficiencies in Irish Water, deficiencies in the ESB and what they say they can supply new houses with. We're not going to meet these targets. And you could go back there. There's an admission within the system that they can't do the job that's required because they're going to hire a housing czar, and that's still there. So that again was an admission. But, and I disagree with you. I think, for instance, what Mark is saying about vacant housing, that is something that could perhaps be looked at. But and when you walk down the street in Dublin, I'm sure in Kilkenny and anywhere else, you see so many vacant shops above vacant
I just started,
housing
John,
above
but
shops.
that as a solution
on the radio
is
show,
simplified.
actually.
Yeah, but it's so simplified. I mean, we've had Michael Smith introduced a living over the shop scheme in 1996, and they've all failed. And there's reasons. Economies of scale don't work when it comes to turning around vacant units.
Well,
it's much more expensive than you think it's going to be.
What I'm told is the reason that it hasn't worked is because of planning, and there was issues to do with fire escapes and everything else. That doesn't seem to be addressed in the bill. The one thing I would say again about today's, and we might be discussing it later on, to do with the judiciary. Today's announcement is actually an implementation of the planning bill, which was introduced last October, which will indicate to you how slowly all of this has to move. It relates to the fact that if a judicial review is taken, sometimes they are taken strategically to allow the planning to run out, and it doesn't matter if you win or lose it, the planning has run out and you can't proceed with the scheme anyway. So it would have said to me that the reforms to do with judicial reviews should have come before that. I'm told that those reforms to do with people challenging housing developments are going to come at the end of it. So to go back to your question, is there an acceptance within government that they're not going to deal with this and the failure is now built into the system? I think there's an acceptance of the slowness of everything. So I can't see under any circumstances how you implement a bill in October. Yes, we've had rows in the Dáil over speaking time and everything else. And that Cabinet doesn't immediately start at the start to deal with the judicial review process, which to me is the biggest problem of anything. Don't mind vacant housing, don't mind anything else. That is people, communities, businesses, everybody else stopping a housing development. That's insanity. But what happened today is you've brought in a planning reform to deal with planning law that should come after the judicial review process is taken. So therefore, there's an acceptance within the system that we've got 5 years till the next election. We can move slowly in this. The opposition landed no punches during the general election on housing. Can you remember a general election in the last three where housing was discussed so little?
No, well, it's because we were going to hit 41,000 homes, wasn't it? Which turned out to be a lie.
But I suppose we're not moving slowly here in relation to this particular measure. This is going to be implemented before the summer recess. There's emergency legislation being brought forward in relation to this matter for the very reasons that you outlined, because we don't want to see planning lapse that has been through the judicial review process. We want to keep them alive so that we can get them activated.
But I'm saying it would make more sense to deal with the judicial review problem.
But sorry, if a magic wand could be waved today and you'd solve that problem, you still then have the issue of finance for the development. You've got the issue of a labour shortage when it comes to the development. You've got the issue, as John said, that Uisce Éireann and ESB can't connect the development to the national grid or to the water system. You still have all of those systemic problems. Do you think that we're going to hit the Housing for All target by 2030?
So we do have challenges in infrastructure. There is no two ways about it.
But do you think we can turn it around?
I do. If I didn't think that we couldn't, that we could, I wouldn't get up and go to work every single day in this job. I've been in the job as Minister with responsibility for planning for the last 15 weeks or so. This is an emergency piece of legislation that's been brought forward here. There are other proposals in it. Everyone in government is treating this with the utmost seriousness, because we know we understand.
But with all due respect, Minister, do you know who I've heard say that? Alan Kelly said that. Simon Coveney said that. Owen Murphy said that. Darragh O'Brien said that. And now you and James Brown are saying that. Why should we believe you when they were all wrong?
Well, look, what I can speak to is what I have done over the last number of weeks.
No, and I'm not making it personal. I'm not suggesting that housing failures are your fault. You're only in the door.
I'm not saying that you are suggesting that. But what I am, and I will reiterate, is there is no one silver bullet in relation to this. We do have deficiencies in relation to infrastructure that we have to address. That is why the Housing Activation Office has been set up to remove silos and ensure that we can provide the infrastructure. We need to have further zoned land, which is why the National Planning Framework was passed a couple of weeks ago by the Oireachtas, and I'll be writing to local authorities in the next few weeks in order to get them to vary their development plans, because we know in certain locations in the country that zoned land is a constraint. Not everywhere, but in certain areas, particularly in the greater Dublin area.
But just for people at home, we have a text in here, currently being outbid for over a year in Offaly, living here all my life. Houses are going for crazy prices. over 80,000 above the asking price, 40 open viewings on the first day. I'm married with 3 kids, paying crazy rent, and we're probably going to end up living back at home with my ma. Politicians haven't a clue. You're saying to that person, no, just to be clear, that you genuinely have confidence that from 2028 onwards, because we heard the projections from the Central Bank and the ESRI today, that the state is going to go from building 37,000 homes to over 100,000 homes.
So we know that we have
But that's what we'd have to hit the target. You said you're confident, you have hope, we can do it.
We know that we have to build, on average, 50,000 homes every single year to 2040. That's the average that has to be provided. Obviously, if you under-deliver in one year, you have to make up that in future years. It is a challenge to ramp up supply, but this measure is only one of a number that will be brought forward by government in the coming weeks. We have to ensure, particularly around apartment development, that we are introducing viability measures. I mentioned the Croí cities. There's changes around the STAR scheme that need to be introduced also, because we do have a challenge when you go above approximately 55 units to the hectare in terms of viability.
Mark, have you confidence?
No, I don't have confidence. And I suppose the question I'd be asking the Minister, is there a problem with finance here? Because when I talk to local authorities, and take my own local authority for Kildare at the moment, we've looked for additional money for tenants in situ, for example. And I had dealing with 7 families at the moment that are about to be homeless. Some of them have got notice, some of them are about to get notice. And I'm told by the government, and I've raised this on the floor of the Dáil, that there is no additional money to be given to Kildare County Council for the purchase of those homes. And that is right throughout a number of schemes that you're talking about, Minister. So the question has got to be asked, and the opposition are asking, is there a problem with money here? Because that's what the local authorities are saying to me. You're also encouraging local authorities to buy additional land. Are you going to provide the money for that additional land when that land becomes available? Because it's a huge issue for our local authorities to identify that land. And also there's an issue with local authorities actually dealing with developers at the moment. And there seems to be a problem there, that they've been also told not to come back, not to do that this year or next year, to hold off. And maybe that explains the figures we're seeing tonight. So there are issues there.
So there's been 350 million that's been provided to local authorities already this year under the second-hand acquisition programme, which includes a tenant in situ programme. There has been some
spent in 2024 in Kildare, unfortunately.
Sorry, I didn't interrupt you, Mark, but there have been some changes to the criteria in that. Yes, we do need additional zone land. We do need local authorities to engage with the private sector in terms of the delivery of homes, and local authorities need to ramp up their own supply, both in the space of social housing and in the area of affordable housing. Land Development Agency also needs to step up in that respect. We need all levers working in tandem with one another.
We're going to have to